Okay, let's start then. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this book launch event. We have an excellent panel of distinguished scholars who have all contributed to the implications of ethnic politics in post-socialist states for China, this book. And you should get your copy. I have mine, and it is signed. We have editors and contributors. Well, obviously not everybody could join us today, but today we have Dr. Qi Zhang, who is the editor and contributor to the book, and she is going to give us an overview of the volume. Followed by that, we will have a chapter presentation on crafting attractive histories and visual narrative construction along the Silk Road by Dr. Julia Surati, who's joining us from LSE. After that, we will have another chapter presentation by Dr. Gulnara Dadabayeva here at KIMEP University, which is on ethnic policies of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan toward minorities. And then finally, we will have another chapter presentation titled "From Whom Do They Learn? Higher Education Policy in Central Asia in the Post-Socialism Era" by Dr. Qixiao Wang. So without further ado, I give the floor to Dr. Qi Zhang to introduce the book.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me properly. Yes, thank you so much, Maryam, for suggesting and helping with the organization of this book launch. It's really a thoughtful way to bring together all the contributions. We didn't actually have a chance to meet together, so it's really nice to have this opportunity. And also, I'm really grateful for Gulnara, which is another editor of the book. She has been such an incredible and reliable collaborator throughout this process, and her insights are really made this editing process a really enjoyable experience. I'm also really glad to have this opportunity to share and promote our book, and it's a project that I hoped that could bring together different perspectives from China, from Central Asia, as well as from the UK. And I think today it feels like it's a fitting contribution to the field in a context of rising geopolitical tensions. So the start of the book started as some conversations with friends from Kazakhstan. So that made me realize that despite the very distinct histories and cultures, China and Central Asia actually share so many underexplored commonalities, particularly in how they navigate the legacies of socialism, how they engage with questions of identity, and how they produce knowledge about each other. The central overarching theme for this book that ties together all the chapters is that the recognition that both these regions should be examined together rather than in isolation, which can bring together fresh insights into shifting dynamics of global power. And to this end, we explored a number of related questions. So, for example, we discussed how do China and Central Asian countries understand each other on their own terms. So, to that end, Julia provided a really nice chapter on China's promotion of Belt and Road Initiative through museums, through cultural, through this kind of soft power projection. And also, my chapter also touch upon this, providing discussion around the development of Central Asian studies within China. We also talks about what does knowledge production look like when we take local scholars and narratives seriously. So, for example, we have a chapter by Qixiao Wang. And the chapter discusses China's education diplomacy and how the state integrated it with BRI to counterbalance the dominance of education provided by Russia and the US. So another thing I really want to emphasize is that I'm really proud of the balance we have achieved in this in terms of authorship. We have contributors from China, Central Asia, and the UK, and it's a very good balance. We have 2 from each region. And this was a conscious decision to bring together voices that are previously, I think, underrepresented in the field of both international relations as well as area studies. And I think this, if we want to really advance more nuanced, rounded, and inclusive understandings of Central Asian China relations, we do need to move beyond Western-focused, Western-centric frames and make spaces for scholars who are embedded in those regions themselves. So this kind of collaboration across languages, institutions, and perspectives is what allows us to challenge dominant narratives and build richer and more nuanced conversations. So moving on, I will be briefly talking about my chapter, and then I will give the floor to other contributors. So one of the biggest challenges I wanted to tackle in the chapter is the fact that China and Central Asia are rarely studied side by side. There are obvious reasons for this. There are linguistic barriers, and there are different disciplinary traditions and geopolitical biases that often silo research. Scholars tend to specialize in one another. So usually within the UK context, one cannot, rarely, they can be both expert on China and Central Asia at the same time. Usually one is specialized in only one of them. And because of that, we miss the opportunities to see how these regions actually interacting and in many cases mirroring each other. And within the field of IR, a common gap is that few scholars are equipped to analyze both region in great depth and link them back to IR theories. And so this is something that I also heard from colleagues within the UK. So some of them, when there are some colleagues in area studies really question IR scholars, saying, how can you really understand those domestic dynamics if you don't understand the language or their cultures? So this is something that I heard quite a lot from them. So this kind of situation highlights the necessity of not only tackling obstacles in terms of linguistic and disciplinary demand, but also these regions are too complex on their own already. So that makes it more difficult to studying them in combination. So in my chapter, I highlight that China's engagement in Central Asia is not just about infrastructure and investment. It's deeply cultural, educational, and epistemic. And yes, China does build roads, but it also exports narratives, institutions, and ways to think about the world, ways to see the world. And these efforts don't always land as intended, and Chinese soft power often stumbles, not because of lack of investment, but because mismatched assumptions and nationalist rhetoric, and also sometimes stumbled because of the lingering regional anxieties about Chinese influence. And indeed, this is not only happens in Central Asia. In the UK, we also see a lot of anxieties towards Chinese influence, such as the Confucius Institutes. At the same time, we also see a growing interest in China in studying Central Asia. I had the opportunity to attend the Tsinghua Area Studies Conference in 2022, and Julia mentioned that she's going to attend that this year. So I was there in 2022, which remarkably took place during the height of China's COVID lockdown. So I was really surprised that the university was actually managed to bring together scholars from around the world. We have to remember that at the time, even Chinese nationals themselves faced huge challenges traveling internationally. And there was a great deal of logistical and political pressure around cross-border movement. I didn't know how they were managed to get secure visas for all the international scholars at the time. So I think the fact that Tsinghua University was able to convene such a large group of international scholars in Beijing was quite extraordinary, and I think that speaks to the strategic importance of area studies in China and the determination of area studies community in China to foster global academic dialogues, even in very difficult circumstances. So what I try to do in the paper, in the chapter, is to shed light on China's shifting foreign policy motivations, especially how it has shifted from, moved away from Africa and Latin America back to its near abroad, including Central Asia. And China has become increasingly concerned with geopolitical risks and overexposure in far-flung regions, especially given the growing scrutiny and pushback by Western countries over that diplomacy and political influence. So China's own economic slowdown and domestic pressures are, of course, also forcing a more cautious and regionally focused approach. So focusing on these immediate neighborhood allows China to consolidate influence when it matters most and allows it to test its foreign policy strategies before applying them elsewhere. So I'm almost at the end of my presentation. So at the end, I would just like to highlight that this book is by no means an exhaustive collection of everything there is to say about China-Central relations. Of course, I'm guilty of probably of overselling the book, but I do see it as a first step, hopefully the beginning of what I believe could be a momentum building initiative to facilitate deeper and more inclusive conversations across borders. And in many ways, I think this volume is a form of track to diplomacy, not in the more formal sense of back-channel negotiations, but as academic and intellectual space where mutual understandings can grow outside official government network frameworks. So I believe bringing together scholars from different parts of the world to engage sensitive, complex issues is part of building a long-term trust and shared knowledge that that more formal diplomacy often lacks. So because I myself is of a Chinese background, so my approach to this is perhaps too focused on China. So I will now give the floor to other contributors, and they will definitely bring their own very insightful perspectives to this. So that's it. I'm going to shut up, and I think the next would be Julia.
Thank you, Dr. Xi. Indeed, valuable contribution from all the co-authors. And just before moving on to Julia's, I just wanted to mention to our members of the audience, if you have any questions, the Q&A is open. You can type in your questions, and we will take the questions after all the presentations are done. If you would like to speak, you can just raise your hand, and I will invite you to open your microphone. Up next, we move to Julia's chapter. Well, she is joining us from LSE. She specializes in narrative studies, and her chapter, very relevantly, is on crafting attractive histories, visual narrative construction along the Silk Road. Please, Julia.
Thank you very much, Maryam, and sure, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction of the volume. I must say at the very beginning that I feel when you invited me into this project, I really felt really privileged to be able to join this conversation. And I want to echo what you're saying about the inclusivity and all the efforts that you and Gulnara put to have all of these different voices with different positionalities to contribute with the wider debate. And this is something that I really personally appreciate, and I think that really makes a special contribution towards the scholarship so far. So today I wanted to share the 3 takeaways that I found out that I presented in my chapter on narrative contestation between China and Kazakhstan over the history of the Silk Road, which all the scholarship, the literature on China-Central Asia relations, when it's not overly concerned with regards to material interaction, material encounters. Chu mentioned earlier the construction of ports, roads, and all of these different infrastructure actually points at the center of the way that this engagement and these encounters have evolved. So as a first takeaway that I wanted to propose, I'm a narrative scholar and an IR scholar. So just like True, I also come from this, I would say, a bit conceptual and theoretical background as a driver for my own empirical research. So the first takeaway, so to say, really stems precisely from the question of attractiveness in IR theory, and especially attractiveness as a discursive product. So one thing that I found in my own work is that attractiveness, especially narrative diplomacy, in the way the narrative are constructed as a means, as contracts for diplomacy, is not universal. But what I call it here is that it's relational. And you will see during my presentation, and if you have a chance to read my chapter, that I have a bit of an obsession about relationality these days, and that really shows into the chapter, I would say. So generally, one thing that we can see from the literature on China's Belt Road Initiative, especially when thinking about Central Asia, but also other areas of the world. So what it's assumed, one of the core assumptions is that Silk Road histories can be repackaged and exported as soft power. But I think that while I was reading the literature, one thing that came into my head and I was trying to question is that I think that one of the problems is that this approach overlooks something that to me is quite crucial, and that attractiveness depends on whether the receiving audience sees their own history, values, and identity in the narrative that is being offered. So, and this is sort of tries to put together research on narrative diplomacy and narrative construction together with soft power as one of the core inputs, assumptions behind the soft power literature is that we need to consider the audience and how these initiatives have been promoted. So it tries to put these two things together. And in practice, in my chapter, what I propose is that for a narrative to actually be attractive, there are two conditions that need to be met. First, this narrative must valorize the target's country official memory. So what political elites already tell their citizens about their history. And secondly, it must use visual tropes that feel familiar, emotionally resonant, and recognizable. So attractiveness is not about being persuasive in general. There is always a lot of confusions, I would say, with regards to attractiveness, influence, and persuasion, as if they were the same thing. I'm arguing that attractiveness is actually something that leads to persuasion and potentially influence. But it's about whether a foreign audience sees itself reflected in how their own story is being told into these encounters. So a second takeaway from my chapter is more tied towards the case study per se. So what I basically very quickly summing out what I say in my chapter is that Kazakhstan's Silk Road history is visual, local, and plural. And it doesn't match China's and the way that China has been portraying the Silk Road in its own narrative construction towards the country. So as a way to explore how these dynamics have been playing out, I studied a particular case study that I hope can be generalized in future research, not exclusively in mine, but in general in the scholarship. So what I did was studying a 2023 Silk Road exhibition in Almaty that was hosted at the Kazakh State Museum. This exhibition featured 65 works by Kazakh artists and offered a powerful counter-narrative to the Chinese one. There are three main visual tropes that stood out from my analysis, and just very quickly on methodology, I'm happy to talk a bit more about methodology perhaps in the Q&A. I just wanted to point that I decided to conduct a visual narrative analysis. Although visuals are at the core of my chapter, I just want to stress that the discussion that I just proposed with regards to narratives and the notion of visuals, it doesn't have to be visual in the traditional sense. It could be also reminders in text about common visuals. So as I was mentioning in my chapter, in my analysis, there were three main visual tropes that stood out. First, the trope of that I refer to as lone travelers and transnationalism. There's been representation depictions of the constructions of the Silk Road as through the use of nomadic figures or animals that were journeying alone across vast landscapes. And this to me symbolizes a Kazakhstan that is presenting itself and its role across the Silk Road as a bridge across civilizations. The second visual trope is one that I have understood as a trope of hospitality and unity, where there are various visuals that have been used to do that. Food, music, marketplaces, they're all recurring motifs. And these visuals have framed the Silk Road as a space of coexistence and openness. Thirdly, one of the final major visual tropes that have emerged from the analysis is one that I referred to as women and traditionalist modernity. There is a centrality in female figures embodying cultural continuity, Islamic tradition, that reflect the Silk Road and Kazakhstan's role within the Silk Road as a vision of modernity that is grounded in tradition and heritage. So this visual narrative that tells us how Kazakhstan has been promoted a vision of the Silk Road and the country itself, its own role within these Silk Road encounters. And these tropes, of course, from interaction with scholarship on precisely on Kazakhstan's own visual representation of itself in the international system, world theory analysis, for instance, shows that all of these visual narratives are actually coherent with the way that Kazakhstan promotes nation building, and at the same time sharply contrast with external attempts to reinterpret the Silk Road. And here at this stage, I want to point towards my third takeaway. So in contrast, when we look at the way that China has been promoted narratives on the Silk Road, we see them that they are generally highly Sinocentric. And that actually undermines, according to my interpretive framework, their appeal in Central Asia and in Kazakhstan in particular. So generally, if we look at the literature on the way that China constructs Silk Road narratives, there are a bunch of things that, of course, come out. But in particular, what was striking to me was the fact that China's visual and narrative toolkit focuses on historical Chinese explorers, historical Chinese innovation, and they really conveyed a sense of a cultural centrality that is really embedded into China's own interpretation of history and culture. But of course, this is problematic because these representations neither echo Kazakh state memory nor engage with Kazakh familiar tropes. Instead of mutuality, they project a hierarchy. And in a region where xenophobia is already a political factor, there is a very recent study by Nazarbayev University that actually shows that into practice through data and through survey results, such narratives aren't just, I would say, unappealing, but they're actually counterproductive into the promotion of a certain way to interpret the Silk Road and to use the Silk Road as a sort of a potential positive encounter between China and Central Asia. So in conclusion, narrative power depends on recognizing the narratives already in play. China's struggle to promote its Silk Road story in Kazakhstan is not simply a failure of communication, of course, but it reflects a deeper tension in how historical memory is contested internationally. And I think that my chapter, especially through this case study, contributes to IR and memory study by operationalizing attractiveness in narrative diplomacy with a focus on visuality and reception. And once again, I think that the core takeaway that I would take from the chapter is that more and more often, we forget about the relationality in our studies, not just in terms of international relations per se, but also in knowledge production and epistemic communities. So that's why I think that trying to understand the baseline and the assumption behind the way that reality is constructed and promoted is so important. And as a final note, I just wanted to thank once again the China and Central Asia Studies Center at KIMEP University for the support that they've given me during my fieldwork experience there last year. And also I am especially grateful to Chu Zhang and Gulnara Dadabayeva for all their, not just for setting up this project, but also for the guidance that they gave me and also the encouragement, to be quite frank. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you very much. We move to the next presentation by Dr. Gulnara Dadabayeva here at KIMEP University. Gulnara's presentation will be on ethnic policies of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan toward minorities. And yes, thank you for sharing. We can see that now. Please, the floor is yours.
Dear audience, dear friends, I'd say yes. I'm very glad to be here during this event, and I'm very glad that all courses, all my courses, and Chi, my dear Chi, they are representing right now our book, which of course which took a lot of time in order to finalize everything and to combine together the views of different authors. And plus, of course, I'm very glad that some people joined us in order to listen to our in order to listen to us how we shared the ideas which we try to show in our book. Thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, I'd like to start with the idea why my chapter is devoted to ethnic policies of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan towards minorities. The main idea which drove me was that probably the present time, I think that the tuning points was the recent events in Ukraine, the beginning of the Russian-Ukraine conflict in 2022, which exactly started, has been already started in 2014, but 2022, it's a tuning point in modern history, which showed that the role of the minorities, and especially ethnic politics of the modern states towards their minorities, shouldn't be underestimated, because minorities started to play extremely important role in the modern world. The whole world, which was based on the idea that liberal order is established, and first of all, we need to pay more attention to the individual rights, including minorities, of course, and so on and so forth. It's very important. But what's going on right now, we see the changing of the whole idea of the international order. And plus, we also see how the modern nation states are transforming into something probably new. Probably it's a combination of some old elements and the new ones. And that's why what's going on in sphere of the ethnic relations, inter-ethnic relations, sorry, and what is behind the new moves in the ethnic politics of the modern states, of course, it's extremely important. Plus, I'd like to also to stress the idea that the attitude towards minorities are becoming especially important because the Soviet legacy, and I'm completely convinced and say that a Soviet legacy, which had been played extremely important or vital role in order to construct the modern nation states in Central Asia, and not only in Central Asia, on the whole post-Soviet space, it's an end of this part of the history. The new states, which have been formed for quite a long period of the time, right now are transforming into the new ones. And in these new states, or partly or partially new states, ethnic minorities in future would play much more important role. And what happened in Ukraine, what's happening in Ukraine, is just the beginning of the process. Probably it's a wrong idea, but at least I hope that the ideas which I shared with you probably convince you in some of the things. First of all, I'd like to start with the idea which I suggested in the chapter, that the aim of the chapter was to determine how the formation of the national identities in modern nation states and Central Asian states correlates with the prescribed role of the minorities in these processes. And the first one, starting with the period of the 1991, after the demise of the Soviet Union, was how the modern states, or at least the states which are more or less in line with the environment, with the international environment, were formed by the authorities, by the governments, by the elite, ruling elite of the Central Asian states, and why during certain period of the time the ethnic minorities didn't play any role, the question of the ethnic minorities didn't play any role, or why sometimes we see suddenly, like in the case of the events which happened in Uzbekistan recently, I mean, first of all, these issues covering the status of Karakal, Pakistan, and there was some unrest in Uzbekistan, why it suddenly became so important. And why I decided to choose 3 Central Asian states like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, because I wanted to take the example of the states to illustrate the difference between the ethnic politics of Central Asian states towards its minorities, and why their tasks, the main task which they had at the very beginning of the building of nation states, were absolutely different. But nation building strategy of each of these countries depended on the situation which existed in early 1990s. As a theoretical, the concept, the main theoretical concept which I wanted to use was Brubaker's concept of nationalizing states, where I'd like to explain 3 main points. The first point was how the nations claimed their titular primacy in 1990s mainly. The second one, how the ruling elite of the Central Asian states tried to find weaknesses of the titular nation, and how they later on settled or solved this problem. And the third one, how they justified this policy in terms of compensation or compensatory projects or something like that, which can be called so. So the main question in that case was how transformation of the state, a new international environment, affects Central Asian states' ethnic policy. What was the difference between the policies of the new Central Asian states towards their minorities? At the very beginning of the 90s, it's a well-known fact, I'm repeating once more again, the fact which you, of course, know very well, but I just want to stress again that the main problem which Kazakhstan faced in early 1990s was the Kazakh-Russian ethnic groups relations because of the composition of the population of independent Kazakhstan and what role was played by Russian language. So the main task of the ruling elite in Kazakhstan was to settle this problem, to avoid the extremes of the interethnic conflict, and to diminish the role of the Russian language in order to distance a little bit from the Russian Federation and to promote the idea with sovereignty and independence. Opposite to other Central Asian states, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan faced, first of all, this problem because there was approximately equal number of the Russian and Kazakh population. And that's why to transform the Russian population into ethnic minority was extremely difficult task. And of course, they needed, I mean, the ruling elite, of course, needed a lot of diplomatic skills, developed high diplomatic skills in order to realize this goal. Opposite to Kazakhstan, in Kyrgyzstan, it was not the main problem. But if you look at the map, you will see the main problem for Kyrgyzstan was its relations with the ethnic minorities which were living on the border with Kyrgyzstan. This is Uzbekistan, Uzbek population, and plus you see the Kyrgyzstan, the territory of Kyrgyzstan, which is situated deep inside of the territory of Tajikistan. So in transbordering regions, the relations between especially Kyrgyz and Uzbek people and Kyrgyz and Tajik people were the priority number one in order to establish a certain position of the titular nation. It's one, and plus due to the limited state resources, it was absolutely necessary to solve it in favor of the native population. And probably this was one of the main reasons why Kyrgyzstan faced or met most part of the interethnic clashes, and including the so-called revolutions on its territory since 1990s. For Uzbekistan, and we see it's for Uzbekistan, neither Russian language nor Russian population were not the main problem. Opposite, again, we see the main problem was how to keep the territorial integrity of the state because Karakalpak Autonomous Republic occupies nearly 40% of its territory, and that's why its relations with it's not a unitary state opposite to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and the opposite Uzbekistan is the only republic in Central Asia which includes autonomic republic, and plus in the constitution of Uzbekistan's republic there is the special there is a special article which insists that Karakalpakistan Autonomous Republic has right to separate from the territory of Uzbekistan based on the referendum held and approved by the population of the Autonomous Republic, which is the which directly addresses the possibility of the possible separatist movement on the territory of Uzbekistan. So the ethnic politics of the states towards its minorities were solved more or less in a way. What strategy what should be chosen? Is it possible to construct the civic nation, or is it possible to construct, or it's better to choose from the very beginning the strategy of constructing ethnic nation, which of course it's easier, for instance, for Uzbekistan, and that's why they try to prevent any cases of the separatism. For Kyrgyzstan, but again, they faced a lot of the problems, a lot of the opposition from the side of the ethnic minorities. And Kazakhstan, which from the very beginning in 1990s decided to not to accelerate the process of building of ethnic nation, but instead they preferred to choose the model of the ethnic constructing of the civic nation. But what happened as a result of the realization of the different of these different strategies was the following things. Finally, all three Central Asian states came to the same idea. It should be ethnic nation based on the increasing the number of the titular population, where the minorities formally received equal rights and opportunities as a titular nation, which is written in the constitutions of all states. But at the same time, it was more or less formally made statements in all of these constitutions. But however, they at least they used a lot of the Soviet experience in order to persuade the environment, the whole international environment, that they are keeping the model which are close to the norms and standards of the world. What is the situation with ethnic minorities right now in Central Asia? And I'm finalizing. Concerning the rights and formal equality problems, I'd say that all the groups of the ethnic minorities on the territory of Central Asia could be divided into two main parts. The first one is local population, or descendants of the local population, Muslim mainly. So Uzbek people, Kyrgyz people who are living on the territory of Kazakhstan, and opposite Kazakh people, Uzbek, Tajiks who are living in Kyrgyzstan, and so on and so forth. They have the rights which can be legitimate for the lands where they are living. And that's why the relations, the attitude towards these minorities should be different. And very often, because they felt themselves or feel themselves as a full-fledged citizens who have rights for this land since medieval time, they are inhabiting this land since medieval time or since ancient time, they have right, and that's why the question could be solved not in favor of the keeping interethnic accord. They should decide it. They should provide rights, and they should provide not formal equality, but a real equality for these minorities. I think that the relations between Muslim population, local population will be more visible, not probably in near future, but at least in future, as I see. Concerning Slavic population, or so-called Russian-speaking population, because they have their own so-called native land or motherland, it's Russian Federation or Germany, for instance, for German people, or some other, for Koreans, for instance, it's South Korea, which also, all of these states opened the programs for the repatriates. That's why sometimes it's just a question of keeping more or less the opportunity to teach their children in the language which is convenient for them, for instance, Russian schools, or access to Russian TV channels, or access to Russian media, and so on and so forth, media, books, journals, and so on and so forth, just to feel free to leave the country and to continue their life on the territory of the other states. They are less, I'd say, why Kazakhstan, for instance, is keeping more or less nice relations with their so-called Russian-speaking ethnic minorities. It's one of the explanations, because these channels are open, but you are free to migrate, to leave the territory, and that's why you're not so attentive to the idea of the rights and equal opportunities. For instance, non-participation in the process of the election or decision-making process or something like that. But these two parts of the population, local minorities, they are different. And plus there is a third one, which small part of the population, they are descendants of the so-called deported people. And they have their own concerns and they have their own rights. And what I think that one of the Soviet experiences which were used as, for instance, foundation of the National Assembly or Assembly of the Peoples of Kazakhstan, which is very, let's say, not really working body, but it's just the case when people have their own cultural centers, people are more or less free to participate in certain events when they celebrate national holidays, when they were suggested to study, to learn their own languages, a small one, and so on and so forth. For this part of the population, it's not, again, the problem of the rights and equality problems. So at the very end, in conclusion, I can say that the Russian language and educational issues will be still very acute problem for Kazakhstan, for instance, and Kazakhstan will continue to keep its line, keeping quite close relations with Russia, because part of the population is oriented towards receiving education, migration to the territory of Russia, and that's why this channel shouldn't be closed. For the other states like Kyrgyzstan at a lesser extent, but for Uzbekistan and even Kyrgyzstan, and at a lesser extent, sorry, for Tajikistan, which is not described in this chapter, I'd say that minorities nationalism would be quite visible in the future, because for the minorities there is no any other way out. It's their land. It's their land. They have been living here for centuries, and that's why they have to have the same rights, and they have to have the same opportunities as the titular nations. And probably in future we will see some new moves in this sphere. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I took too much time for my presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Gulnara. Thanks a lot. The last chapter to be presented is by Dr. Kishal Wang, who is joining us from Xi'an International Studies University. And his chapter is about higher education, titled "From Whom Do They Learn? Higher Education Policy in Central Asia in the Post-Socialism Era." The floor is yours.
Thanks, Maryam, for your kind introduction, and also thanks for Chu for inviting me to write such a book chapter for China Central Asian relations. And then I think just now the Gulnara's conclusion also, I think it's a starting point of my research, that you concluded that the educational issue should be like a further consideration. But here in Xi'an, especially in Shanxi, that after 2023, the first China Central Asian Summit, that we have a very clear observation that all the local corporations towards Central Asia is put the priority on higher education. And also, I think today, I think something phenomenon also added on my answer to this, like learn from home, because I just saw the news that today that the Cardiff University in UK, they plan to set up a branch in Astana, and that means within like a nearly 10 years or so, there will be like Astana or Almaty will be like a highland for those higher education institution. Like they have a tug war to compete each other. And also this point of the chapter, also from my observation when I traveled to Astana and Almaty for at least twice, and I saw that a lot of young generations who can speak very good English, and they eager to register in those foreign higher education institutes. For example, like there's the university in Seoul who set up a branch in Almaty, and also there's one from UK and also American as well. And so far, Xi'an has two confirmed one one is in the campus of Eurasian University in Astana, and then my university is planning to set up a branch there to rent a building to set up something about like AI related thing. So this phenomenon like attracted me, like how that the higher education system, since their like independence in 1990 to those kind of like analysis, and also how the higher education system in Central Asia has evolved since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and what we can learn from those kind of like countries. And also, I think Central Asian states has impact on the challenging journey of redefining their education system. And during the post-socialist transition, these countries have sought inspiration from various global models, ranging from the Russian academic tradition to the US, the European Bologna process, and even the Chinese higher education frameworks. And because we have the Belt and Road initiatives, and we can provide enough scholarship to those Central Asian students. For me, I'm now supervising one from Tajikistan, and there will be two more. One is from Kazakhstan, and another from Uzbekistan, who is already in their sophomore. And these things are changing, and it's reconsider like how China's higher education can impact on the Central Asians' higher education. And also my research highlights like how the choice of educational models is often not merely an economic decision, but also a reflection of a deeper social political consideration. For example, the countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they show a keen interest in Western education practices and emphasizing like quality assurance and academic mobility. Like for example, like the university that they set up the China related like research centers, and they welcome all the Chinese scholars or the global scholars who related on like China Central Asian studies, and they can stay there for a while and to do their research. And in contrast, some countries in Central Asia, they with closer political and cultural ties to Russia, has maintained stronger ties to Soviet academic heritage, which it means the students they sending abroad, they still have a very weak English language ability, and their thoughts are somewhere still in the Soviet Union area. And understanding like higher education policies in the Central Asia is crucial for several reasons in my eyes. Like firstly, education systems shape the future leadership and professional landscape, especially in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, because Kazakhstan is now as a hub for many international organizations. Because last time I talked to the information office of UN, which is in Astana, and then he said the younger generations in Kazakhstan is very eager to learn English, and they're very eager to know like how the outside world outside of the Central Asia. And the second one, it served like its educational policy is linked to national identity and culture preservation, as Gunnar as a presentation. I think these things are closer tied up with each other. And also the third one is that since China launched this BRI, and the higher education landscape became a key settle to the local cooperation in their strategic space for soft power competition, like the Gudia's research about like how the exhibition to show like China's ambition in their, we call it, it's very hot word now in China. I think Chu, you mean that international communication, that the President Xi is focusing on it very heavily to like how to promote China's international image like in the global community. So I think basically my chapter is just a very starting to observe those changes in higher education system in Central Asia. And I believe that I think Kazakhstan will be the first one that to fulfill something in the higher education highland, or we call it hub in Central Asia, and which is the next one. I think we still need to have a very close watch. Maybe like Uzbekistan, because they have very dense young generation, which is their advantage. And so I'd like to like make a further like analysis on this topic. And thanks for all.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have one question already. Members of the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the Q&A section, or you can raise your hand if you prefer to speak. The question is to Julia. You can read it, right? Even if China adopted a less Sino-centric narrative of the Silk Road, would it improve its image, given the strengthening of nationalist narratives at the expense of cross-civilizational narratives?
So thank you very much, Harry, for your question. It's really interesting. And of course, the way that I've studied and seen these processes, I do think that less Sino-centric narratives that integrate simultaneously traditional visual tropes and established historical memories would definitely resonate most, or at least a bit more, with foreign audiences, because in general, I would say that they would touch upon deep-seated emotional recognition. And this is not just me saying this, but I draw this conclusion from two scholarships. One is social psychology, and the other one is actually the work done on visualities in international relations. So, for instance, Holstis tells us that foreign narratives valorize the sanction memories on the same issues, as foreign audiences tend to reject information that contradicts their pre-existing ideas. This last part on the contradiction of pre-existing idea and the sort of the confirmation bias are from Holsty and other authors in social psychology. And secondly, the second point, literature and scholarship that I've been basing my work on, is that what I say in the chapter is that foreign narratives refer or adopt to variants of visual tropes commonly recognized by foreign audiences, because visualities tap into social emotion. And there is the work by Callahan on visual international relations that I used to back this up, transport people into narratives. Scala has a huge theoretical study, conceptual studies on this. And also, I think this is one of the most important things I would say, and bridging towards the emotional IR scholarship, because these visuals, these visualities can be empathized with. Hagström and Gustafsson, for instance, they've written a lot about this, but I think that the 2019 study on China and Japan particularly helped make this point. So yes, I think that less Sinocentric narrative, despite everything, would definitely assist into building different image for China because of this reason, because they resonate with these underlying processes in the way that individuals actually understand and process reality. And I hope I answered your question.
And also, if may I, that I can ask a question?
Sure, of course. Go ahead.
It reminded me that what is ongoing now is the first summit of the EU and Central Asian in, I think it has what's happening now, right? And interestingly, oh no, I think it's in Samarkand, yeah, in Uzbekistan, and it's also the previous like Shanghai Cooperation Corporation Organization, the summit there. And interestingly, within 2 months that the second Central Asian, China Central Asian Summit will be held in Astana. So like how those citizens in Kazakhstan, they can perceive their like attitudes towards those external powers like sitting in Central Asia, especially like because the EU, the first EU and the Central Asian Summit is really a obvious sign to prove that the EU is now focusing on paying more attention to Central Asia, and the China is back again after 2 years since the first summit in Xi'an, and it's a time to examine like how those 2 years, how many achievements, and to check up the list, like how many they complete. And so I particularly would like to hear like your point of view from Gurnala and Maryam, because you are the local there. Thank you.
Gulnar.
As far as I understand, your question is that what is the attitude of local population towards Western powers? First of all, European Union. That from here, what is the attitude?
The attitudes towards those external power, like they are now paying more attention to Central Asia, especially it's a very phenomenal one in the history that the EU pay more attention and to organize such a summit in Central Asia.
Frankly speaking, it's interesting question. I'd say that probably only Kazakhstan is very sensitive to the idea of what is the image of Kazakhstan in the international environment. As for the other states of Central Asia, I think that they are less interested in promotion. They are very pragmatic, opposite to the other states which are led by ideology, which are led by some other things. It's a very pragmatic approach. So our relations with European Union, whatsoever, or any other states are based on the idea of what kind of the benefits, what kind of the profits we can receive from these relations. And I think that the European Union right now is no. The Kazakhstani idea, I'm not saying about the other states because they have their own vision, but the Kazakhstani idea is to keep multilateral diplomacy. Why? In order to keep the balance between the interest of Kazakhstan, first of all, to promote its interest, and not to be too distant from the states which are really important, and at the same time to counterbalance their pressing or increasing pressure on the politics of the states at the expense of the improving relations or keeping nice relations with the other states or international organizations like the Shanghai Organization or some others. So no, I'd say that it's geopolitics plus politics, foreign politics, and plus it's also I think that right now nearly 30 years later, Central Asian states finally started to realize themselves as a not object, but as a subject of international relations, and they are clearly realizing how it should be played, the game with the other states, including global powers, including great powers. And plus, I think that, yes, this is my vision.
It's very.
Yeah, I can add something to that, and that is that ventures into Julia's area of interest, I say, because it's actually a very good example of seeing the power of narrative and self-power in general, how it plays out in practice. So it is interesting to watch these events as they unfold. So from on the one hand, you have, for example, the EU. The EU is already very advanced compared to China in terms of soft power. You don't need to prove many things to the general population. For example, when it comes to your area of higher education in the EU, it is accepted as as something that represents quality. But still, for example, as you have also pointed out in your chapter, for China, it is something to build. It's a process. It's going to be a very long process of image building. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect is that these summits were planned before, but now we are right in the middle of a global political, geopolitical, geoeconomic storm that makes these events even more interesting. And the tariff wars coming in and so on. And really both the EU, I mean, in the examples that you mentioned, both the EU and China find themselves in a new reality that is even more intense compared to last year when these summits were planned. And even back then, the whole story about the middle corridor, that, okay, so Russia is closed and the only real viable route for trade between the Far East and the EU went through Central Asia, which is why one of the main reasons Central Asian countries received this attention, got prominence. But then even compared to back then, now this new reality hits, and it will be very interesting to observe how it will continue.
And thanks. And also, may I add one that yesterday I checked out think tank policy paper that said, because China is planning to build the China Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan railway, and there is an analysis from Kazakhstan who said Kazakhstan and Russian is happy to see the postpone or delay of this railway building, and because it's the only piece that I found, and I just want to verify whether this is a very popular view to see this railway, because Kazakhstan is supposed to receive those transit fee from the railway, but after the completion of this railway, that Kazakhstan will be reduce their revenue from it. But I'm not sure, and I cannot.
It's really not. It's not serving the same route really. It's a network. So basically, it's got its own purpose.
Okay, so that means it's not can be served as a common point. It's just like someone.
I think everybody has understood from the past experiences that relying on a single route is not a good idea. In terms of competition, it's really it's more, I would say, it's 80% toward diversification. So there is no reducing the load from one route and adding to another one.
And so I'm looking forward to the next week, because next week I will accompany with 20 young generations from Central Asia. Of course, the 5 stands, or I think each country they sign up for young experts on like digital and high tech when I will accompany with them in Xi'an and also in Ningxia to see like how the Chinese experiences they can learn from. And this is really good thing. If there will be the second volume that I can do something on this. And there too, right?
That is certainly an excellent idea. I will remind everybody on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions. Okay, so thank you very much again for your time today. Thank you to our audience, and thank you Dr. Qi Zhang joining us from St. Andrews, and editor, contributor to the book. Thank you, Julia Sirati from London School of Economics, contributor, Dr. Gulnara Dadbayeva, editor and contributor, and Dr. Xiao Wang, contributor. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.